What is up, guys? A little update on this nasty flu. I'm still under the weather, as you can probably hear. My voice is probably changing progressively every single video, but I feel a little bit better today. Like, I overall feel better. And I'm not just saying this because I took some medicine. In fact, I'm gonna try to not take anything today to just really see how I feel. And if maybe, possibly, I'll be able to go to the gym tomorrow. I'm not even wishing for it anymore. I'm just like waking up and just going on a day-to-day basis, depending how I feel. Definitely not training today. What I'm gonna do tomorrow morning though, I'm gonna do a little check-in just to kind of compare and have a look at how my body changed in literally an entire week just being at home without working out and being sick. So that's going to be quite interesting to have a look at. So another fun video today. Instead of reacting and criticizing a celebrity's workout, but instead I selected one exercise which I think is probably one of the most performed exercises in the gym. And it can be done in so many different ways. You almost cannot go wrong with it, which is the seated cable row. If you've been following me, then you know that it's an exercise that I'm very fond of. I've been doing it for years and years and years. I don't think there's ever been one rotation where it hasn't been in. And again, it can be tweaked and performed slightly differently. You could say it's kind of multi-use. You can change your position to target your upper back or more of the lats with different attachments. So what we're doing today is watching and reacting to 6 different bodybuilders or famous names in the industry performing this exercise in their own unique way and have a look at the differences and what is happening essentially. So first up, we've got Sulek. He's doing a variation with a triangle. So this is a neutral grip, but it's a very narrow grip. Looking at how much it's lifting, it's probably going for a medium slash low rep range. Sam has the habit of performing everything quite fast and explosive. And this is the characteristic of his style of training. I think when you get to a very advanced level, it starts to become a bit more of personal preference in terms of the time and attention and the speed of the exercises. Generally, if you're a beginner or an intermediate, you want to keep everything as close to textbook as possible, meaning that you want to slow down your eccentrics, you want to really control that concentric as well. Even if you keep it explosive, you got to make sure that you've got really good proprioception, especially with muscle groups like back. They get a little bit more complicated to engage. It's quite important that you focus on these things until you really own that exercise. Obviously with Sam, he knows his body really well and he quite clearly has a really good muscle connection with his lats, and that's why they're growing so well, even though his form is not necessarily textbook. But there's always the argument, what if he actually did things differently and really slowed down the eccentric and completed the reps, etc. What if he would have had a better physique? But I guess that will be a question that will never find an answer. So in terms of his execution, or what we can tell from what he's doing, he's depressing the scapula quite a lot. So he's actually pushing the shoulder down quite a bit, and is also protracting the shoulders very slightly. This suggests that this is more of a variation where he wants to target the lats a little bit more. I actually haven't watched the full video, so I don't know if he gave an explanation of this at the beginning of it, but it definitely does look like he's targeting his lats more than his mid-back. In fact, you can clearly see that he's making the effort to almost open up his chest as he's rowing back. But if you look at the scapula, it isn't actually moving that much. This would suggest, together with the shoulder being depressed, that he's actually feeling it and is targeting the lats a little bit more. Sam also likes to do a lot of lengthened partials, so you can see towards the end of the set is just really trying to squeeze as much as possible out of the movement, even when he cannot complete the rep. It's definitely worth doing them if you're really comfortable with the movement, meaning that you just really know the exercise, you really know where you are, so you have a good proprioception, you know exactly where you are in space and what you're doing essentially. If this was a client sending it to me, I would probably have quite a few things to say and to probably encourage to change, but I think there are some really good principles here in the way that he's executing them. Second up, we've got Chris Bumstead. He's actually performing exactly the same exercise, which is a seated row with a triangle. So in general, I gotta say, it's not my preferred. If I think of doing that exercise in that position, I would use a neutral grip that is slightly wider, perhaps shoulder width. so that it's easier to align the joints and is essentially also easier to drive that elbow back without having to force the body to pull in a direction that doesn't really want to, if that makes sense. There are also some advantages in using the more narrow grip. At the very bottom of the lift, you could arguably say that the lat is slightly more lengthened, because it's essentially the arm is also essentially going slightly across the body. It's not just in front of you. So so there is that slight advantage, but I definitely think that the disadvantages of this grip beat the advantages, if that makes sense. But again, you know, when you're at a very, very high level, a lot of it is down to preference when it comes to proprioception, so how the exercise feels. He obviously, you know, knows what he's doing. So his execution is a lot closer to textbook, as you can see. The movement is a lot more controlled. I'm guessing that he's also using a lighter weight, at least lighter for him. It's definitely not going for a medium to low rep range. Protracted retract, there's definitely a lot more retraction. Obviously we can't see this from the back, but even though it's not actually opening up his chest as much or leaning back as much, so there's not like an awful lot of thoracic extension, there's definitely a lot more scapular movement here. In fact, his elbows are also being driven back a lot further than Sam, for example. The intensity of the set overall is quite low. You can see by how that final rep looks compared to the others, pretty similar in terms of the speed, and that's usually an indication that you know, you're still fairly far from failure. So I'm assuming this was a workout that was really close to the show, considering how lean he is as well, and so for that he was probably working with reps in reserve. So yeah, quite interesting to see him perform it like that. I would say between the two, I definitely prefer this version. It just looks like the range of motion is more complete, and it looks like he's getting a bit more out of the exercise. I'd be curious to see him perform the same exercise but with a much more challenging load, and seeing how his form changes at that point. And then we've got Ronnie Colman performing the same exercise with the same attachment. Again, crazy to think he would do this exercise with a triangle, considering, you know, how humongous he was with a tiny little triangle trying to pull, you know, the weight stack. See, his form is even more different, as you can see. I remember watching this particular video years ago, actually, as I was getting into the gym, and I still remember his words, you know, commenting on how he was trying to, you know, really stretch the lats as much as possible. What we know now, you know, with the notions we learned about biomechanics, is that by, you know, leaning forward to that extent is not actually lengthening the lats as much as he thinks. In fact, mostly what he's doing is working with a bit with his spine and a bit with his hips. So essentially he's bending from the hips and is really leaning into it. So actually there isn't much more lengthening of the lats. But what this is going to give him is the opportunity to add a lot more momentum. So by starting in this position and then, you know, using your body, the whole of your posterior chain almost to, you know, to drive the weight back, it gives you a lot of momentum. And so this would potentially help him going a lot heavier. Not that he needed any help going heavy, but this is quite clearly what is happening. You can also see it by the speed of the reps. It initiates that concentric with a lot of power, and it's almost like the final bit of the range of motion is just, again, it's just momentum for the most part. It was probably, you know, also feeling the squeeze to an extent, but there definitely isn't a lot of time under tension here, we could say. What is also happening is that his shoulders are still protracted. When we look at it from the back, there's definitely some scapular movement, but actually not as much as... And I think this is purely because the triangle is so bloody tiny for him that it's just impossible to really retract the shoulders. It would just look and feel really weird if he had to really retract the shoulders all the way back and still having to hold this tiny triangle in the middle. It just wouldn't really work. But this has its advantages, I think, because by forcing him to stay slightly more protracted, even at the very top of the movement, it just quite simply means that there's going to be more lats involved. And so that lack of retraction, it's just forcing the lats to do a bit more work. It's kind of a blessing in disguise here, and I think it's working really well for him. I think it's quite interesting to see him lean that much forward, but then as he's rowing back, he's not using all the momentum to literally lean back and get out of position. Is actually still in a slight hunched position where, again, the shoulders are slightly protracted. He's really depressing the shoulder, so you're definitely not seeing him shrugging up. And he's and he's just driving that triangle towards the hips. So I bet he was really feeling it in the lats, this one. His foot placement is also higher than Sam and Chris. And considering that Ronnie had long legs, it looks slightly uncomfortable for him actually, because it's almost like his huge quads are a little bit in the way, but he doesn't seem to mind anyway. Okay, next up, we've got JP. Okay, so he's bringing a complete different way of performing this exercise. First of all, his grip is wider, as we were saying before. He's actually probably slightly wider than I would go, which makes sense because he's wide as fuck. And you can see how this grip is definitely more comfortable for him in terms of allowing him to bring the elbows back and in line with the resistance. But he's actually performing this exercise as an upper back movement. So what he's doing is leaning back quite a bit and performing what it almost looks like a low row, really protracting the shoulders, using quite a bit of his upper back and upper traps and rear delts. And obviously he's going really, really heavy. This is a medium/low rep range for him. So I think considering how unusual the position is, he actually has a lot of control over the movement. These type of reps are really, really difficult to standardize, and this is probably why I wouldn't prescribe personally an exercise like that, not for my kind of clients. When I say standardize, I mean making every rep look the same. It'd be very easy starting from that position to slightly change the range of motion, slightly change the angle, slightly change the amount of protraction and retraction, and every rep kind of comes out a little bit different, and there's no standardization. And this makes it very difficult to track. It makes it very difficult to determine whether I'm actually working on what I want to target. This is not about, being super anal with things. It's just about knowing what you're actually doing. But obviously his level of experience is probably some of the highest in the industry right now. So again, he knows his body really well. He knows exactly where he is in space as he's performing the exercise. And so for him, this kind of execution makes a lot of sense. But this is also where I think it's important to start making a distinction when you're watching people perform exercises online. Like even for me, I consider myself, someone that really knows their body. And I think I have a really good proprioception generally across the majority of the muscle groups. And that's because I spent a lot of time just really understanding how things work and really connecting with what I was doing. And I kind of had to do it because it started from a place of being quite dysfunctional. My rib cage is quite concave. I had a lot of issues of activations with my chest. So there were a lot of things that I had to work on and learn. And this kind of brought me to have generally a pretty good proprioception, but still, I wouldn't do this exercise this way just because I would struggle to just really standardize this. And so yeah, this is a clear example how you can turn this exercise into an upper back movement just by leaning back more, having a bit more scapular action. Next one in line is Mike Israetel. A complete opposite style of training. We talked about standardization, and he's the king of standardizing reps. You can clearly see how every single rep looks exactly the same in terms of tempo, position, everything. So his choice for this exercise, at least for this particular workout, was a pronated grip. He's actually using a fairly close grip, clearly targeting a bit more of the upper back here. You can see it from the amount of protraction and retraction that he's putting into the movement. His elbows are also fairly high, and this is obviously allowing him to decide a bit better what he wants to target with these rows. So yeah, so here the execution is pretty much textbook when it comes to how accurate and precise it is and how consistent the accuracy is. But obviously the overall intensity is lower than it was in JP's video because Mike uses a different training system. Next one up is Dwayne Johnson. The final one we're looking at today, similar version to Mike Israel. This is targeting a bit more of the upper back and he's using a straight bar, but this is a wider grip. He's using a lot of explosive power, which I can definitely appreciate considering how much weight he's using. You can tell this is fairly heavy for him also by how he placed his feet on the platform. They're actually quite high up, and this is giving him a really solid base that he's using to hold away and hold his body in position. I can't quite see from this angle, but it does look like he's slightly leaning back, which makes sense with the movement that he's trying to perform. Again, targeting his upper back, leaning back a little bit definitely doesn't hurt, but he's focusing on retracting the shoulder and also open up his chest, so extending his thoracic. This is something that we actually haven't quite seen the other guys do, and the feeling that that thoracic extension is giving him is definitely helping him engage more of the traps and rhomboids and all that good stuff in the mid-back. Also, the wider grip is really forcing him to keep those elbows wide to the side, which again really forces him to make the whole exercise a lot more purposeful. Overall, I think his execution is pretty good, but I've seen Dwayne Johnson perform other exercises before, and I would say his form is always generally quite good, and I think this comes from a place of being passionate about fitness and bodybuilding. He's also full of so many injuries, and trust me, when you have so many different niggles and injuries, you gotta learn how to train properly, otherwise you get even more injured like that, and it's just really annoying to take time off. As someone that gets injured quite easily, I can definitely tell you that's the case. This is it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found this useful. I'm hoping to bring you some more content in the gym very soon as I'm fully recovered. But if it's your first time here, thank you so much for watching. I'm posting one video a day for a year straight, so feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow.